I'm going to talk about selling a business. My name is Iain. I'm a partner in corporate finance in Smith & Williamson. And what I'm going to do is talk about two key projects today. Project C, which is the sale of a manufacturing business, and Project H, which is the sale of an IT technology business. And what I'm going to try and do is put some flesh on the bones of the key questions you need to be asking yourself, but you think you might have the answer to already. There is a disclaimer there, but what I really want to say about this presentation is, whilst we do run a process, and I could put up slides on an actual process, what we do is run a bespoke process for every different business, so everyone is different. So the first key question you often ask yourself as an entrepreneur is, now is the right time to sell, or is now the right time to sell? And those reasons can be both internal and external. Project C, the manufacturing business, their internal reason was, well, my client said, I'm debt free, we're going to have a good year, I'm not going to take the business any further forward. So in his mind, the internal reason to sell was the right time. But interestingly, during the process, he had a slight crisis of conscience. About 9 months in, offers on the table, and he suddenly starts thinking, what am I going to do afterwards? That took about a month of our process when he resolved that in his head. He decided he was going to do a deal. It changed who the buyer was, and it changed the deal we did. External reasons might be things like, the market is hot, there's a buyer group that's ready to buy you. Project H was exactly like that. They had a big four accounting business banging on the door, offering to buy them, not to sell them, to actually physically buy them for themselves. And there were 2 or 3 buyers in that process who were very keen and very interested, so it was a case of pulling those together. So in that case, it was an external factor that drove the market. What we say to people who own businesses is, a good business will always have a value. It will probably always have a good value. It's about finding the strategic buyer and also being ready to sell. So, you might think you are ready to sell, but there's a lot of preparation involved in getting a business ready to go. Now, with a large business, particularly private equity backed, it's possible to put most of the data into an electronic data room and have people make their buying decisions through that medium. But in the entrepreneurial owned and smaller businesses, it's much more difficult. You have to prepare properly. And there are some key areas you need to think about. First one is tax. Is the big business organised correctly? Are your tax bills settled? Have you done the tax planning required to make sure you get entrepreneurs relief? Have you used the right schemes involved? On Project C, my client had engaged in some tax planning and invested in some schemes. We did know about them, we did disclose them, but the finance director forgot to mention to us that there was an HMRC letter saying they were about to conduct an investigation into the schemes and would they like to settle. That cost me 3 months of process while I rejigged the deal to sort of isolate those tax schemes. It cost my client £400,000 or £500,000 in sale price. It's really important to understand where the value lies in a business, whether it's a specific project or product. So Project C, the manufacturing business, had a South African subsidiary, which was half the business and half the profits. Now that business probably was less valuable than UK business, even though it was higher growth. And the reason for that is because prices of South African businesses are different to those in the UK. And I will talk a bit more about that and how buyers look at businesses in another slide. But what we should have done, which my client, because he's a chancellor, didn't want to do, so he ignored our advice, was actually move the billings of the whole business into the UK and collect cash in the UK rather than having them locked in South Africa. That would have made $1 million or so difference on the price, I think, by the time we got there. But he didn't want to do that, so we didn't do that. The one that's often ignored by entrepreneurs is succession. So even if the general conception is a buyer will often have their own management team to run your business once they bought it. That's very often not true. they often need you around, and they probably don't have the skill set to understand your business. So having succession in place makes it easier for you as an entrepreneur and a seller to step away from the business and move on and go on to the next phase of your career. What it also does, which was very important for Project C, was gives us another exit route. Because if you've got succession, we're more likely to get a private equity buyer come in and offer as part of our process. And I'll talk about private equity in another slide. The final piece in time to sell and being ready to sell is where you are in your growth cycle and growth curve. So growing businesses are more valuable, but also whatever an advisor tells you, selling a business is a hugely time-demanding process. We do a lot of heavy lifting, but you are still distracted during the process. So if your business is growing and you've got contracts being signed and contracts coming in, it's probably a good time to sell because you'll be able to hit your numbers all the way through the process. Another conception that sellers often have is that their buyer will be international. They might be, but typically when we run a process, we say to entrepreneurs, you probably know who the top 5 or 6 buyers of your business are because you compete with them, or you can see why they would want to buy you. So we do identify a range of buyers during our process. We do a lot of research around the world and pick up buyers who are left field. But the truth is, in most processes, it's one of the 5 or 6 businesses you know well who are going to be the core buyer. The jurisdiction that business, that buyer is in, also makes a difference. We talked about the South African business in Project C. Well, businesses in South Africa go for multiples of 3 or 4 times in the sector this business was in. We sold this business for 5 or 6 times. But our South African buyer, who was a key buyer of the business, came in at that 3 to 4 times level. Just because that's the way he thinks about value in his home market. There was an Indian buyer as well looking at that process. And again, they looked at the process from their own internal market. So again, they were lower priced than our eventual buyer, who was private equity. You can find a wild card in the sale process. Sometimes you find the right buyer from a foreign country or another jurisdiction who comes in and values the business differently. Project H, the IT business, we had 5 or 6 key buyers, so we knew who the buyer group were. But our research identified that a large Japanese corporate was doing a buy and build in their own markets, and so we approached them, and they eventually were a successful party and paid the top price. Finally, private equity as a buyer of your business is something you shouldn't discount. People often think that private equity pay least value. Well, they try to, it's true, but often they pay what they can afford. So often they may well be the best payer for your business. Project C, the manufacturing business, was exactly that. We were able to construct a deal with a private equity house which valued the business significantly more than the trade sale option. Now, yes, my client had to leave some money in and left some cash on the table, so he still had 30% of the equity in the business and was owed some money by the business, but de-risked his position by taking £9 million of the £12 million of the price off the table. And was still exposed to the growth going forward, so he felt he still had a stake in the future. The final thing that you probably think about selling a business is it's a short, sharp process. Well, it can be. Project H was done in 4 months, but Project C took us a year. And you have to factor in as part of that timing the tidying up process. So are there things that create value in your business that you need to do now, which will take a couple of months to get right? Is the accounting function producing numbers on a timely basis? Are your tax affairs correct? Are you ready to survive a due diligence process? These things you need to cover. You also need to over-determine the numbers. And what I mean by that is, know that your business is going to perform throughout the process. If the numbers go backwards, it damages value significantly because you're underperforming what the buyer thinks you're going to do, and it's an excuse for them to chip a price. Ironically, on Project H, the numbers did go backwards during our 4-month process because the management team was so distracted. However, we were successful in actually raising the price during the process because we had such competitive tension between the buyer group that they could see the opportunity coming forward and the pipeline of deal flow coming through. So they were able to pay the best price in the market. Project C was a stable cash flow business, so the numbers were solid throughout our process and improving. Our biggest issue is actually South African exchange rate. Finally, in a process, you need to understand where the buyer is in their own internal process. So I'm acting for a large European water group at the moment, buying in the UK. Now we're about to buy a business which is over £10 million. Now they've got to go through French board approval to get that, so there's another layer of process that we as a buyer have to go through. It's going to take us another couple of months to get a deal done. So understanding what the buyers are and what their process are, and indeed where they are in their own M&A cycle. So if they've got their own M&A team, what they're looking at, what capacity they've got to look at a deal, particularly if it's a smaller deal. Because if it's not a massive strategic deal for somebody, they'll put it off in favour of the bigger deal they need to do. Private equity are different, because they focus, they're deal doing all the time, so they will focus on the deal that they want to do it. But understanding the buyer group and where they are is critical to success in the sale. I only had 20 minutes to talk, and so what I hope I've done is covered some key questions that you might be thinking about in relation to your business. I'm happy to take questions either formally or informally afterwards if you want to chat to me about something, but that's what I want to cover today, so thank you very much for listening.